Hello, my name is Joshua, and first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you in this video, and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video is going to be on why people get it wrong when they say, oh, now science has proved something or demonstrates something that we all intuitively know. So sometimes this is true from an socio economic sense that there is an intuition that people have had or thought for many centuries, and science reveals it to be the case, or science shows that it's highly likely. Not revelation from the religious sense of the word, as in, thus here is the truth, but this is the likely explanation for this, given the best kind of empirical constraints we can put on an experimental setting to demonstrate the validity of this hypothesis. And so, science is in the business of testing hypotheses. It's not in the business of proving truth. Truth is not the same thing as necessarily the validation of a hypothesis, because a hypothesis can be turned over once there is a great enough amount of evidence or a body of evidence to overturn that initial claim. It's why the public's idea of science is honestly just a narrative as much as the Christian's belief in science, or the Christian's belief in theology, or the Buddhist's belief in uh, the Bhagavad Gita, or sorry, that's wrong. The Hindu's belief in the Bhagavad Gita. And it's a narrative. Those are all narratives and stories that could be approximations towards certain experiences in the world and things that people think. But are they absolutely true? Well, that's a story. The belief in absolute truth is a story that we tell ourselves. And people's take on science as a public phenomenon is just the exchange of a collective story of what science is and what science means. Science as an actual activity or discipline or domain is a bit more like cooking. So people who cook, they have the firsthand experience of cooking, and so cooking for them is something like a story, but it's more like an activity. And so science for the scientist, an activity; science for the public, a story. And in this story, we often hear people say, well, look, this thing that science has tested and shown to be likely the case is something we all intuitively knew for a long time. The issue with this statement is oftentimes people do not go back to the original source or the paper. They don't read the actual research themselves. They read a news clip or a blog post talking about this research, and because news clips and blog posts are layperson friendly, they do not usually cite the statistics, the data, or the graph, or the actual method of experimentation. And so what the people are reading is the writer's summarization or the writer's paraphrasing of the conclusion of of that experiment. And oftentimes the problem with this is that the writer does not write the analyses. So there is the conclusion. There are several parts to a scientific paper. There is the conclusion, and then there is the analysis. And the analysis is kind of really what's most germane to what to really think about this thing, because oftentimes in the analysis, I mean, different people write, and in different domains, they're constructed differently. But this is a relative trend. It's not a truism in the sense that everything is like this, but in the analysis of the paper, that's where the writers of the scientific paper, the ones who conducted the research, talk about how this conclusion links to the broader scientific theory that everyone is concerned with, or the construct within the domain that this paper is tangentially or most approximately related to. And this is necessary because empty facts don't mean anything even to scientists, or not empty facts, I shouldn't say empty facts, that was wrong. facts just as in and of themselves, or conclusions as they are, don't really have any salience to scientists. They don't just do experiments to produce experiments. Maybe in the actual practicality of what goes on in science, some people do just produce experiments to publish papers, because that's what they get paid to do. So putting that aside, in the most truest form of theoretical exercise, the conclusion is meaningless unless it's weighed against something, or we have something to compare it to, either other studies done, or the relevant theory behind the study, or the potential nascent emergent theory behind the study. And so that's what goes on in science, and that is not what people put in blog posts. What people put in blog posts is basically the summarization of, maybe at best you get what the researchers did, some of the numbers, and then what they concluded, and then maybe a little bit of this here from the analysis is what we're going to put in here. Why? Because a general audience, does not have an understanding of technical jargon and the nomenclature that is a part of the scientific domain of investigation. So it's also the case that the news writer probably most likely doesn't understand those things either. So they just write what they can understand, if at best. If it's the same person doing all the work, because even in most publication, I'm going to call them bureaus, publication bureaus, you have several people who may be doing different ends of the work. There are people on the research team, and then there are the writers. Sometimes the writers are the research people. Sometimes the writers are not the research people. And so it depends on who you're reading. So just keep that in mind. And so given these kinds of facts, even still, mostly because of the audience, the audience and the person writing it just kind of distills the information to the point of, let's get down to the bare facts and what we find relevant or salient to our thinking, because we're trying to get people to read this stuff and get interested in it, or something like that. I'm not really sure. But either way, the problem with it is that it tends to give an environment for this statement: science shows or proves something that we all already intuitively knew. Science doesn't do that. What it says is, here's what we concluded via this experiment. Here is how this conclusion fits with respects to what we know according to this theory. Here are the problems with this experiment. Here are the problems with this theory. Here's what could be done next. And that's what a scientific paper says. Or here's what could be done next, or here's a suggestion for what people should try, because science is fundamentally a domain of uncertainty. That's really what it is. And so this whole thing of it proves something intuitively true that we've already known is just bullshit. It's just people's tendency to like to believe in certainty, or to have something that affirms their beliefs, or whatever narrative that is most relevant to their political, social allegiances. And so that's the way that I'd put it. And more so, part of the reason why this also is the reason why it probably seems socially newsworthy to people is because what is science mostly in the business of doing? Disrupting human intuition. Human intuition is a poor judge of what is going to be empirically the case, because empiricism is non-linear in its actuality. So in terms of its effective existence, and in terms of its closest thing to objective existence, effective meaning human beings can go and smack some sticks together in the world and find some outcome that they can measure from smacking the two sticks together. And that's a crude statement, but what I mean is, we can manipulate the material environment to produce some phenomenon, and we can then measure it with some kind of standard, and then make some kind of prediction based on smacking the stones or slapping the sticks or whatever. We get this when effectively we perform these sorts of actions. We can sort of derive half-ass causal relationships that we tie together with statistics in mathematical modeling. And so that's what science is in the business of doing. And so that's an effective understanding of the world, in the sense that we're only looking for a model of coherency and what can pragmatically be determined via a given set of constraints, and what can be known about the variables related to these constraints in the initial condition of the system that we sort of pick out initially to conduct some kind of experiment or see something. That is not a philosophical venture into the absolute truth of something. I hope people can realize that. That is a particular act of epistemological construction or generation, which is why science has a particular tag on it as a branch of philosophy. Science is actually a branch of philosophy. It is a particular set of philosophical ideas and methods for investigating epistemic claims. Uh, and it's a very effective one. That's why people love it so much, because the affective landscape is truly the human landscape. The effective landscape is the one that people tend to value because people are practical and pragmatic. People want to see their goals and their aims met in the world. And so the information that helps people do this the best, that's the kind of information they like the most. So that's why everybody loves science. Now, or people are envious of it because it is so effective, and so they don't like it. But you find even Christians turning their eyes towards science and saying, "Oh, look at what science proves is the existence of God," or "Ah, look what science proves is the value of love," or "What science proves is this and that." And, look at the wisdom of the Bible, because the science is just trying to show what the effective truth of certain things are, and it's enormously powerful in its scope, because it is fundamentally concerned with effective truth first and not some other kind of truth. And so effective truth is not absolute truth, it's a pragmatic truth. Now, why am I bringing this up in this discussion is because just to first say that, one, science doesn't prove anything. So science does not improve an intuition or reveal something that everybody intuitively knew to begin with. Then I said that science is overturning human intuition, because science is concerned with an effective landscape. From the effective landscape that science is concerned with is nonlinear in its makeup, and the objective landscape is nonlinear in its makeup. So if you're asking, and so I was trying to define what I mean by effective. Now, saying the effective landscape is nonlinear in its makeup means this. So if you try to really understand from a predictive standpoint why things happen in the world, it is not intuitive, because human intuition is a religious sort of intuition. Um, and that's what I would say. So just to talk about religious intuition, or what I call, or what I'm going to call, the phenomenology of religion. So let's just take a little detour into, I'll get into this in terms of my discussion on contemporary ethics when I talk about the self, but I'm going to talk about it now because it's kind of necessary to understand in terms of what I mean right here, because there's something to understand about human psychology via us being the social animals we are. We are liturgical, meaning that we like to openly commune around particular symbols of significance. So many people standing before a bonfire and chanting is very meaningful to us. Many people standing around a tree and saying this tree signifies this. Everybody look at the tree, and this is what the tree is going to stand for. Means something big to us. It's sort of where punishment and certain things certain things come from. We're liturgical. So all of us agreeing on some kind of symbol. In America it's the dollar. All of us coming together and agreeing upon the magnitude or worth of some symbol as a means of social transaction and judgment is very important to human beings. So that makes us liturgical. And then, which you notice, now will everybody stand and read the scripture here? That's liturgical as well. So liturgical just means a bunch of people agreeing to do something means this, and that's what it means. And so we say it all at once, or we all agree to do this to a relative degree. There's certainly variation, but we are liturgical, and so that's what we are. Then we are. Sorry. I laugh because it's the same reason why comedy is funny to me. So, like, why do I find Chris Rock funny? Because it's the truth. It's so, so that's why I laugh at a lot of things I say, because it's like, oh my gosh, I have these images in my head of funny things, people doing funny things, and how funny it looks. It just looks funny when you think of it from an analytic standpoint. Just saying, third person outside of you, it's just funny. Okay, so anyways, we're liturgical. So that's what we are, and I'm not any different. I'm just laughing because it's the thing I've seen. Anyways, so liturgical. That's one of the things that we are, and then we're narratively, based. So what am I telling right now? I'm telling a certain kind of story. Maybe the story has more facts in it than other stories. Maybe the story is cased in a certain language. Because humans are storytelling because we're linguistic, and we use language to codify our experiences and share it with other people. And so, liturgical, narrativistic, we always look for broad patterns to our experience to explain ourselves and other persons in the world in relation to the things that our culture has designated for us to value. Then we're also cultural or materially cultural. So that means that we produce material in the world that we make rules over, that we use to govern and limit one another, promote and punish one another. So that is what culture is basically in the business of doing. So we're cultural, we're narrativistic, and we're liturgical. And these things have a very big relation in terms of the constitution of the human self. And so that is what's going on, and that's what's going on in the self. Now, why is this relevant in terms of understanding science always overturning our intuitions? Because this is the intuitive landscape. Ta-da! So do you see in this intuitive... Sorry. Alright, sorry. Do you see in this intuitive landscape anything about empiricism necessarily? No. So, do you see in this intuitive landscape anything about truth necessarily? No, not unless it's a part of a cultural value or something like that. It's like, no, it's not there unless it proves itself, unless it proves itself useful in some way. It's not getting into the story, and so there we go. This is what intuition is based upon in terms of the social landscape. There's clearly more intuition going on in the human mind than just this. This is the intuition of the self, not the intuition of the human animal. The human animal is much more complicated than just when your conscious mind is referencing what your subconscious mind is doing and then telling people and trying to enforce this or enforce that or claim this or claim that. So this is what I'm just talking about a very, 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 very like small section. So don't mistake me for saying that this is all human intuition is, because it's not that. It's much more complicated than that. But from this intuition, guess what we got? Religion. So that's this is why human beings are religious, and so and it may not be. It may be the case that that's all human beings really are: mythological, religious creatings, centering concerned things. Next to familial, social, relational things. It may just be that we're familial, socially, relational, and religiously, phenomenologically centric, and that's it. And so that's all that's at bottom. And maybe, I'm not saying it is, but maybe, because the more and more and more I analyze people and what they do, the more that just seems to be the story. And so it's why people think that we were created by God or something like that. But I hate to break it to you, we weren't the only liturgical, religious-looking hominid out in the wild. Homo erectus and Neanderthal, we know, both had marriage and had certain kinds of rituals and ceremonies. And we know Neanderthal buried its dead, painted itself, and various species of Homo erectus did similar. And that they were each interested in the way that their tools were shaped, the coloration of them, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of the evidence is incomplete, of course, but there's a lot of evidence to show that human beings are not as unique as we think we are. It's just that when we came around on the scene, that every 30 or 50 species of things that were similar to us was dead, extinct, or merging on extinction, and somehow got integrated into our DNA. Either we mated with them, and so here we are. And so it seems to be the case that it's an evolutionary product, just like anything else, not a divinely inspired anything. And so why? So there are some reasons for. I think religiosity. Well, so I'm not going to get into it. This is not about the phenomenology of religion. This is about what's going on with why science debunks intuition oftentimes and doesn't, in most cases, in scenarios, vindicate it. That's, it's why it's news, because the news reports what's atypical. And that's the other thing that gets on my nerves. News reports what's atypical. News does not report actuality. And so why does news report atypical and not actuality? Because news reports stories. And why do we care about stories? Because stories are things that do not typically happen. So if it typically happened, nobody really notices it. The brain is not interested in necessarily homogeneity. It's more prone to pay attention to differences or seeing a multitude of complexity and moving those things to homogeneity. But because the world is not on the face of itself very complex until you start trying to understand why things are this way, you start trying to do something specifically or achieve some result. On the face of it, it's not a very complex thing, but in terms of looking at it, so if babies wake up, 6-year-olds walk around talking about why this is in the world and why that's in the world, and they say some pretty fucking crazy things. And so it's not difficult for this this more religious phenomenological intuition to come up with a narrative for the world itself, and it seem coherent and sensical to the being espousing it. Now that sorry, espousing it. Oh damn it, the video's getting long. Anyways, now that is just to say that I'm laughing. Sorry, because this is all funny because it's true. But it's like, okay, now that is just to say, all right, I'm trying to hold it on. Okay, self-control. Now that is all just to say that science is a particular story-making thing. And so there's a story that, well, so anyways, news, whatever. I'm going to finish the thing with the news. Look, news only reports atypical things. That's why even the whole idea that the police are killing a lot of black people. Now, if you look into the statistics of it, the police actually kill less black people per year than they do white people. And so it's not, and how many people do the police kill per year is not a freaking large number either. But there is definitely narratives. And it's not the case that the narratives are completely false. The narratives have some vein of truth to them, but they have to be interesting to people. And interest is not reality, unfortunately, because reality is not fundamentally interesting. Reality, because we have a salient system in our mind, reality has to be something pretty, what do I say, normal, uninteresting, um, do not pay attention to unless necessary to pay attention to, because the brain is something of a dual processing system that works on association and instinct and motivation. Human beings are fundamentally lazy, like all other animals. The brain doesn't want you going and paying attention to everything in the world or chasing every freaking thing that looks like a gazelle unless you actually have one, because you consume calories. The caloric makeup of the world is a fickle one, and resources are scarce, and so it's just saying, unless it's a story, unless it's news, don't pay attention to it, because we have to save our energy. And so that's human nature, and so that's what's going on with the brain. And so the news does not report what's actually going on in the world fully. It reports or selects facts that it can actually make a story out of, because people won't pay attention to it, because it's like, and today the sky is blue. Well, thank you for telling me something I already knew. So that's why the news does not report facts. And so that's also why the writing is misleading. Scientific writing is very misleading. Public scientific writing is very misleading, because it's another form of news. It should be called the Science Newsly, or Science. There are Science Weekly things, like the news of science. When people are talking about popularizing science or talking about what's going on in science, they should just say that they're reporting scientific news, so that you have a certain priming to understand that this too is a story, and this too is not typical. So, not typical. This is extraordinary, out of the ordinary, not normal, is not usually likely the case, is not typically going to happen. That's what science is. That's what science, when people are writing about science or reporting it, that's what they're doing. Unless it's educational or instructional, and even then, that is not exactly the facts, because the thing you learn from scientific instruction and education is all those facts are old, and so it means that they're wrong. Are they wrong from a technical sense? No, they're not wrong from a technical sense, but are they wrong from like an absolute effective sense? Yes, they are. And so it's just, okay, you have the professionals, and then you have the writers, and then you have the public. In between this dynamic, there are stories that are generated. The working scientists, they never know what's going to be the case, and they put that in the paper. They have ideas. They're intelligent people, and they do their research. And so they cover their ass, basically, whenever they write their papers. The news person, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so they just know they're a person like most other people who have a certain kind of training in journalism or something like that. They're writers. And so they write, and they like to popularize things because they like to influence people and have their voice heard. And so they are interested in science and they value it. So they want to tell people about it, but they're telling people about it, or pastors. I mean, because look, I'm like staying with my grandmother right now. She listens to sermons on the radio. I hear Christians on sermons talk about this piece of scientific or psychological or neuroscientific literature that validates some claim in the Bible, and then it's like, but if you read the paper and read it all the way through, you would know that, look, what you're saying right now just doesn't agree with what's going on. But nonetheless, people are not rational, okay? And so don't assume that just because somebody is referring to science or talking about science that they're any more rational than the next person. It's not a good thing. And is rationality the point of life? No, but don't assume that they're any more logical, coherent, or there's more substance of the truth here, or something like that. And don't assume you can actually tell or evaluate it. You know what's going on. It's unfortunate, but you have to get some sort of expertise to really evaluate things in the world because there's a lot of bullshit. There just is. If I'm being honest, I can't debunk everything, and because I don't really pay attention to facts all that much, I can only talk about the general trends and the logical concerns. Because again, this is like a logical critique of something that I hear. It's not really me saying, "Here are the facts." So, this is a general pattern. Because look, I'm a storyteller. No, so this is a general pattern. Um, and it's why when people say that this is a general pattern and you should know and understand that science, it sometimes has a hypothesis that agrees with what we already thought, but in most cases, instances, and scenarios, that's not going to be the case. And so it's not to say people can't have their cake and enjoy it while it's there. It's just to say that don't allow that to be what you view science as or what you think the point of science is. The point of science is not to agree with human intuition. In fact, it's better that science underturns our intuitions. It's just that because we're concerned with effectiveness. So let's talk about effectiveness just really briefly. Because look, man, if you're trying to send somebody into outer space, you're trying to figure out how to make the most cost efficient this or that you can have. This is damn human intuition. Because look, man, there's a limited amount of resources and it's costly because there is a limited amount of resources. And there are more cost effective ways of doing this, there's more cost effective materials there are and because a lot of the world in terms of making systems work depends on human capital, to hell with your ideologies. We should understand psychology, neuroscience, and cognitive science, and understand the human animal as it is, not in terms of what religions say, not in terms of what ideologies say, because they're gonna get it wrong. They already assume a certain conclusion because they privilege a certain set of values. Who the fuck cares about those values? What really motivates people? What really makes the human perceptual system what it is? What are the emotions? What constitutes an experience for a person? How do you motivate people? How do you do this? Like from just the most effective standpoint you can have, because look, man, nobody likes being at their job, but if there's some science that could make the experience more tolerable and you could get more productivity out of people, the better. It's like the world is a terrible place in certain ways. There is an enormous amount of pain and suffering and sickness and death within the world that everybody is going to have to deal with and experience to a certain extent. And so, because this is the case, it's just nice to reduce these things. And that's